Hi, I'm Prophet Natty. Thanks for listening to the Caribbean Cannabis channel. Meditate with us every Monday as we seek to educate you on the latest developments and personal stories of those shaping the cannabis economy across the region. Now here's your program. So welcome back to the Caribbean Cannabis channel, everyone. Today we have a very educational but both entertaining and insightful conversation here with members from the Higher Yields Consultancy team, a consulting firm out of Denver, Colorado, but they have operations across the US as well as international partners. And joining us today is the CEO, Corey Wagner, as well as their business development director, Anthony Adkins. Thanks for joining us today, brothers. It's a great pleasure having you on the show today.
Excellent. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Daniel.
My pleasure. So as we were discussing before, you all were giving us a little inside scoop in terms of your own personal story as well as how you would have gotten involved or started Higher Yields Consultancy. But before we do begin, can you just give the viewers a sense of geography as to where you're joining us from today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here in just south of Denver, Colorado, and so live in the mountain states in the Mile High City.
And I'm here in Denver, Colorado, right downtown at Ground Zero.
So Corey, I'll start off with you. You were just giving us an insight in terms of, as I said, your own personal story developing the Higher Yields Consultancy and really seeing it as a way of filling the gaps in the industry, as you would have made mention. What were you exactly doing before Higher Yields Consultancy, before that vision, that idea would have sparked in your brain?
Well, I started back in 2008 out in Northern California, up in the Emerald Triangle, helping out cultivator co-ops develop as compliant systems as they possibly could back then. Obviously, the industry's changed quite a bit in the last 13, 14 years. Back then, it was still pretty wild, wild west. And, there was still a lot of concern with federal governments getting involved, state government, and even local government. So trying to help people back then just try to get compliant and try to make sure that they were in the best position they could to mitigate as much risk as they possibly could. And in 2010, I made my way out to Denver, where I owned and operated a couple retail stores, cultivation sites for a few years. We did really well with those, but even here in Denver, they had a much more regulated program that they were setting up, but it was still very new, and they were still figuring out a lot of the nuances, and a lot of the regulations at that time were kind of put in place in theory rather than in practice. So over those 3 years, as things came up and rules would change, obviously those were pretty drastic changes when there wasn't much there. I think when we started, there was about 40 pages of regulations. Now we're up to about 600 pages of regulations. So it's been kind of neat to see it evolve. But in 2013, I got out of operations and just started working my own personal operations, and I started working with other operators who at that time had distressed assets and were not operating very efficiently. And what we did for them was basically kind of fix and flip their businesses. So come into their cultivation, implement in our systems, from there work our way into retail, into marketing, branding, and then eventually selling those businesses to larger operators. And then in 2015, saw an opportunity to kind of take those systems and recognizing a little better the value that we could bring from a professional service standpoint to the industry. And I created Higher Yields Consulting.
How does it feel looking back throughout that journey? Did you envision that you would be here with Higher Yields today?
In the beginning, no. I think in the beginning, it was a lot like everybody who gets in the industry. I was going to have 1 million square feet of cultivation, 100 stores, take over the world. But I think, what I kind of learned was it was going to be, looking back on it, it was going to be a very big industry, and it was going to be really difficult to be involved in so many different states at that time and be able to really develop what you need to be successful, having a full vertical. And so when I got into consulting, or when I was kind of looking at getting into consulting, I saw a lot more flexibility and really aligned a little bit better with my skill set as more of a problem solver. Like, I can be good with routines, but doing them over and over again every day, it's not really my thing. I like to to help solve problems. I like to come up with creative solutions, build relationships, see new things, try new things, and, be kind of the first to do things on a global level. So, I guess in some ways, there's some things if I could go back in time that I would have done differently that may have put me in a different position as an operator. But overall, I'm pretty glad or pretty happy with the decision I made. It's been really cool to work on all these international projects and see so many different, entrepreneurs and cultivations and retails and brands, and, work with local governments, state governments, federal governments, develop regulations, create international supply chains. It's been really neat, and it's certainly evolved into something that I never really thought it would, or, I guess since I had never seen it before, I just didn't realize the full potential of higher yields. And I think even today, and Anthony, I'm sure you can agree, like we're still kind of recognizing, some of that potential.
Yeah, I also love and agree with the idea of spontaneity and always seeking new heights, and kind of sounds like a play on the words of the higher yields, because you're always seeking that higher yield, So in terms of you, Anthony, and your connection with higher yields, what was the process of moving away from the industry that you were in and actually getting involved with higher yields consulting?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned before, my background was in telecom and technology. So highly complex, highly regulated, especially on an international level, to see, markets come together and the struggles and the pains that they had, with delivering, solutions into those to help resolve either, communications issues surrounding technology actually doing what they say that it did. And, helping these organizations, not only nationally, but internationally on an enterprise, type of level. So, having the opportunity to be a part of launching the global consulting arm of one of the world's largest telecommunications companies at that particular time, was a real joy for me in terms of overall business development, how important partnerships are, strategy and ecosystem development, partnership development, channel development, even, taking that and bringing that expertise into an environment that, is young and it's growing in an industry that is, really, running up against complexity, running up against, highly regulated environments, supply chain elements that, how you need to finesse, but yet stay within regulation and compliance, as Corey mentioned. I mean, so, bringing that expertise into a very interesting industry and an industry, and a plant that I've, researched, that I've done a lot of insightful study on, just from an overall medicinal aspect. Why was it ever illegal to begin with? It was like asking questions like that. And, you have a plant that can, ultimately can clothe you, can shelter you, can heal you. That's a pretty amazing plant, right? And so, being a former collegiate athlete, from that standpoint, there's no doubt that my body aches and pains and, those sorts of things. And to be able to, engage in a plant that can help ease and heal, and it's been quite amazing. So, my interest in looking at an adjustment in my career, this industry was wide open to me as I felt, meaning I wanted to make a dramatic change, but a change for the better. Now, being on board with higher yields and given this opportunity to be in this industry has really allowed me to bring, that expertise of business development on a global, level, to be able to bring and mitigate and risk, and to elevate return on investment, to make sure partnerships are solid, are accountable, predictable, that when something is introduced into the ecosystem or with our clients, that they can anticipate a great response from, a responsible, accountable relationship. So those, matter, definitely in this industry. There's still an element of skepticism that surrounds it, that permeates, our communities, our cultures, and that sort of thing. and how do we innovate? How do we educate and really bring forth, the benefit of this plant and, to elevate the economic standpoint of countries, right? I mean, that's huge. When you're taking a look at, for example, like the Brazilian market, they're estimating it to be, in the next 5 years, a $6 billion, $8 billion a year industry, just in Brazil alone. So that's a high level of economic impact, for sure, and employment and education. I mean, all the things and ancillary value add that this industry can bring. So that was, the reason why I'm here. And, given this opportunity with higher yields has been nothing less than amazing.
Yeah, well, I'm hearing the excitement from the move, the shift. It seems as though that shift from the telecoms and technology into higher yields would have suited you perfectly. Yeah, so I'm always glad to hear when persons make that shift and they could bring their expertise from their own industry into cannabis. Because persons like to separate cannabis and see it as an isolated industry, when in fact the cannabis industry touches nearly on every single sector, whether it be economics, health, spirituality, telecommunications, all these different things would include within the cannabis industry. So it's always great to hear how persons could tie in one expertise into this one. In terms of higher yields itself, when we were speaking before, you would have given me a little insight about the services that you'll offer at higher yields, which I'm pretty excited by, because usually when you hear about consultancy firms, they focus on one aspect of the cannabis industry. So some may focus on compliance, some may do security, some may focus on growing services. But being a premier consultancy firm that you'll have both. Let me get the 4 pillars exactly, which you'll have me mentioned: compliance, commercial, growing services, as well as creative branding. And sometimes, especially coming out of the Caribbean, a lot of us may not be familiar with the reach that you have to have while entering the cannabis industry, some of the things that you have to actually consider. So just give us a little more insight in terms of the levels that you all have at higher yield consultants.
I'll tell you, Anthony. You know this one better than me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because, we do have sort of an internal motto, no project too big, no client too small. And when we look at it, we look at viability, we look at feasibility, assessment, bringing certainty to individuals and groups that this is their first time getting into the industry. Where do I know I want to be in the industry. Gosh, where do I start? Well, higher yields brings that expertise, brings that element to their vision. As I say, there are 3 key things that really differentiate us, in this market. Number one, we customize what we do. I mean, we take a good amount of time in the beginning of a relationship to really understand the vision, the end game, the goal. And we've heard things like, I want to establish a legacy that lives beyond me. I want to have something that I'm passionate about and want to be involved with. Some of it is an economic move, right? Somebody is a diversification move. So what we do is we really pay attention and customize our approach so that we're always in alignment with the client, with the group's end game, end goal, or their vision of what they seek to accomplish. Then we pull that back in our customized format and talk about current reality. And current reality sometimes is something hard to swallow because, sometimes we'll get inquiries say, hey, I have $50,000 US and I want to get involved in the industry. And first thing is, well, $50,000 is good, but what about the industry do you want to do? Right? So it's, because $50,000 ultimately is not going to get you very far in terms of, depending upon what they're doing and how they want to structure. So that customization piece is we pay attention to their end game, end goal. The second thing that really, differentiates us, and as Corey, I'm sure you probably, had heard from him, is that, the extensive experience that we have in the cannabis industry, from the early days of seeing it evolve and seeing what's occurred, seeing the issues and obstacles and things that took whole businesses out that are no longer functioning or alive today. You know, we've been there and done that. We're not basing this on some sort of theoretical pie in the sky utopian view. I mean, we're getting down. We've been in the trenches. We understand the mistakes. We help mitigate those mistakes. We help mitigate those risks. And, you know, and bringing that expertise of the entire team to the table for our clients, is pretty unique in this industry, actually, because we're fluent throughout that supply chain. The third thing is we operate in phases or phased approaches. A phased approach is very important in this industry because of how it does mitigate the risk. When you break it off into segments or pieces, now we're able to do those feasibilities assessments, financial modeling, give roadmaps and budgets and timeframes and timelines that can be used to garner support financially, support operationally, you know, for our clients. That phased approach, you know, by building a building block on top of that, that way you can anticipate what those costs are going to be. You can help maintain fiscal responsibility, maximize return on investment. And if we need to, if a client needs to pivot, another huge opportunity and why we do a phased approach. Pivot, unforeseen or variable changes happen all the time. And if someone is too far down the road, and has spent a whole bunch of money in a certain direction and all of a sudden that changes, right? There's a chance at losing that investment or having to redo something all over again. And, though as I'm sure, you know, you picked up from Corey's explanation of why he started higher yields, we're very good at corrective services, but we would much rather have a client start off the right way, to be able to mitigate, to be able to have an opportunity to pivot if they need to make variable change, to work within a framework, work within a budget is very big. So those are the three major elements, right? And we apply that thinking throughout the entire supply chain, throughout our verticals or our pillars. Growth, right? Of course, that's the back end. Startup, right? How to start, where to go. Bring certainty into an uncertain environment. Design consulting, that whole system implementation of a proper cultivation that, you know, achieves a higher yield, and definitely a pun intended, because, you know, that's exactly what we're about, is that higher yield, higher elements of return on investment. And then of course the marketing as a service. Now that you're up and running, you've got to have a brand. What does your brand reflect? How do you create that brand awareness, messaging, positioning, logo design? You know, before, back in the early days, you could slap a green cross on a plastic container and go, woohoo, I'm selling cannabis now. And we need to be a little more savvy, a little more paying attention to building trust, you know, in a marketplace that is global in nature, right? And to have an eye on that. So those services support our differentiators, which of course ultimately educate, innovate, and help our clients achieve their end game they're in.
Awesome. Like, I love how you ended it off with saying that you have to become more savvy, in order to produce those higher yields. And it speaks to where we are at this point on looking on from the Caribbean towards your company, and here you allow the experience and the expertise to speak for itself rather than just jumping in, because it's a market that's always evolving, it's always growing, and you have to be able to stay ahead of the curve, basically, to keep up with the times. And you're doing a great job at that, and I'm hearing it behind your voice. No wonder why you're one of the leading cannabis consultancy firms. I wanted to touch on one of the things that you would have made mention, and it's tying into the quote that you would have said, no project too large, no client is too small for higher yields. And it speaks to a mandate of sorts for not just looking at those who have the the big capital to actually start up? As you would have made mention, if you're coming with just 50,000, or what is the plan that you have for that 50,000? What part of the industry you actually want to invest into? Right. So I just want to touch on how does higher yields like assist those who probably may not have that much capital, or you're disproportionately affected in terms of the industry that you're in your own region. How does higher yields enter that, or how does customers reach out to you to assist?
Well, we still try to work, with people. But we take a lot of pride in being honest with people. There's a lot of consulting firms out there that won't tell you, what's going to happen or what could happen, or, that maybe this isn't a good financial investment for you. We prefer to be very transparent upfront with those clients and letting them know. And sometimes it's not a matter of, $50,000 won't get them anything in cannabis, but $50,000 won't build, 10,000 square foot facility like they want. So a lot of times, we still try to support those clients and getting them started in developing business plans, creating the resources and the documents that they need to be able to go out and raise capital. There's also, we have a grant program that we run here at Higher Yields for some of our domestic clients to apply for federal grants that, generally don't apply necessarily for cannabis or for hemp, but revolve around like education, research and development, medical research, like PTSD and cancer and those sort of things. Because there is still funding out there to support the industry. You just have to be very creative with how you do it. And often clients really appreciate that because you don't have to give up equity in your business in order to get that capital. But there's still it's a smaller investment, but it's usually kind of a smaller return than having an investor come in and just give you millions of dollars. So we still work with them in those ways. And then here in the United States, one thing we're seeing a lot more is social equity programs. We haven't really seen one yet that we feel has been rolled out properly per se, but there are a lot of programs that are starting to get a lot better, and states are starting to communicate more over their state lines to understand what they did right, what they did wrong, what they can do better. And those sort of programs basically offer those who've been disadvantaged by cannabis legalization the opportunity to still apply for licenses and get support through that process, or offer them smaller application fees. A lot of our clients who are going through that process, we might offer them a social equity discount to help put their applications together, help them compete in those state markets. So, while $50,000 I know is just kind of a number we threw out, it can be very difficult, but we still try to work with clients and help them, find an area of the industry in which they can get involved. And it may or may not be what they originally intended for, but that's part of what we do, is opening doors that people otherwise didn't know existed. We're showing them opportunities that they otherwise had no idea about.
Yeah, sometimes it's about looking at not putting all your eggs in one basket, essentially. Sometimes you have to look at other doors that are there to get into the same venue as you're explaining. I wanted to touch on the funding, and thanks for going into it. One of the problems I know that many persons, not just in our region, face, but even in US, is when it comes to funding or banking. How do you all assist persons in terms of navigating those spaces, or is it as difficult as persons usually make it out to be?
Well, I think raising capital, no matter what industry, is very difficult. And depending on how prepared you are, what your track record is, what can you show that you're actually kind of bringing to the investor. A lot of times when we create business plans, we tell people an investor's going to look at the executive summary. They're going to look at the bios to see who they're working with. And they're going to look at the financials. Then they're going to come back through and read everything else. So, what that tells me is that executive summary, they want to know if this is something that interests them, something they see value in. When they look at the bios, investors, they invest in projects, but at the end of the day, they really invest in people, and they have to trust the people. They have to believe in the people. And those people have to be believable. They have to be trustworthy, and they have to be experienced, capable, competent. And then the numbers have to align. There's a lot of models that Anthony and I have run across that are pretty aggressive, and we generally try to take a little bit more conservative approach because we've seen these businesses, and, some of them 1 in 1,000 may do exactly what they think they're going to do and not have any issues along the way. But that's generally not how we see these markets roll out. And it's not only on necessarily the client or their project. Sometimes it's up to the local government or the state government who's maybe slowing down the process or creating new regulations or new issues or new hurdles to get over. So yeah, as far as raising money, it's not easy. Depending on how much money and how big of a project, we often tell clients to, start small, prove concept, and then try to raise the money through kind of promoting scalability rather than the unknown, something that doesn't exist. Like if you have 5,000 square feet and you're producing, your 3 pounds of light and your tests are 25% and better and you haven't had any issues and you have a clean record and you're making money, it's going to be a lot easier to go out and raise money for 50,000 square feet than if you don't have anything. If you've been growing in your basement, you're not a real business, those sort of things. So, we really encourage clients, as they are raising capital to, start small, prove concept, unless they have investors who are just ready to go and ready to write checks, which I would say never or very, very rarely ever happens. But starting small and just proving that concept is a big thing we push the smaller operators and conceptual startups that come to us.
It's sound wisdom there. You're referring to starting small and understanding the place that you are at. In terms of partnering with local governments, federal governments, as you would have made mention, I know that you all are always reaching out to our clients from international countries have been reaching out to you all. In terms of any Caribbean, and I'm not too sure if you all have set up shop in the Caribbean as yet. I know Jamaica has their industry, St. Vincent, as well as Barbados. They have their medical cannabis industry up and running. Have you all assisted any of those local governments or any organizations there in terms of setting up their own cannabis business?
So we're working with, and I'll pass this over to Anthony as well, but personally I know the projects that I've been working on for the last couple of years. There's a couple groups in Jamaica that we've been working with. One is kind of a co-op of licensed growers who've been there and are native to the area. Another group is looking to kind of move into that area and sees a lot of opportunities to the export opportunities that exist in Jamaica. Other than that, I've done a little bit of work in Portugal. I know that's not necessarily Jamaica or Caribbean islands, but one of the groups we worked with, the supply chain went through the Caribbean islands and up into to Portugal, Spain. Other than that, Anthony, what about you? What projects have you been working on down there?
Yeah, the other projects are pretty interesting in both Barbados and also now starting up in the Bahamas. A lot of these are, the introduction into the medicinal bureau, cannabis and licensing and aspect of Barbados. We've just been made an introduction to that group down there, exploring different grant opportunities and funding opportunities for projects, but also, in terms of advancing the regulatory environment into hopefully adult recreational usage as well. Bahamas are been pretty interesting from that standpoint, as there's a lot of changes going on in the ministries down there and new appointees that we're going to be introduced to help formulate, as they don't have that background, in the industry, and what should we do? Asking questions on, tax bases and tourism and, just a lot of really great conversations that we've had that will lead to, that are going to lead to additional projects. From that standpoint, Uruguay, Argentina, Ecuador, Colombia, interesting what's happening, of course, in Panama, with the regulation and legislation talks that are happening down there. So we have our fingers on that pulse, and, I'll definitely, pass it over to Corey in terms of Mexico. What happened with higher yields in Mexico and how great that relationship, is, and how we've supported them. Australia, we have new projects occurring that we're active in, and now being able to get into and understanding the issues and obstacles they have, that we actually can provide the relationships and the advisement and how to overcome those particular things. And so how we're functioning and how we're working and having this global breadth, it leads to that continuity, the supply chain, the ecosystem, the partnerships, the experience, what we're hearing, what we're thinking, even knowing, Nathaniel, what are the right questions to ask? What are the discovery to help them prompt, their creativity and thinking, and actually not being not afraid of the industry, but hesitant about implementation of that.
Yeah, it has, what do you think about our region, at least? Persons are very conservative, so that's where you'll get that hesitancy in terms of they don't want to make this step now, they want to make this step later, as well as the region is heavily politicized. So anything that you look to do has a lot of politics behind it. So I think that's where persons as well develop that fright in terms of actually getting themselves there. And that leads me to ask, like, what are the similarities, the differences that you all are seeing as to where these countries are now opposed to where Denver would have been years ago or even today?
Corey, you want to touch on that and also circle back on Mexico too? I think that's really important.
The big difference we see it here in the United States, we see it everywhere. It really kind of comes down to education, in my opinion, and the people or the citizens of those places really pushing for that education and for those programs, are seeing the opportunity, seeing the potential, seeing the benefits of this plant. In the U.S., we have, it's federally illegal, but each state has their own program. So we may have one state that they have adult use recreational, and then next door to them, there's no cannabis program, there's no medical, there's no recreational, there's no adult use, there's nothing. So it's kind of interesting to see the U.S. and kind of understand, demographics of people in those different areas, but also some of the disconnect that we experience often, whether it's at the local level, the state level, federal level, international level. But I think we see that same thing internationally right now, where a lot of countries are starting to kind of open their eyes to it and see more of the economic benefits of it, rather than just, it's this plant, it's marijuana, it's a drug, it's bad for you, we're going to have all this crime, it's going to create all this violence, which, in a mature market like Colorado, I've actually seen a decrease in drinking and domestic violence and things like that. So, there has been, somewhat of a positive impact to negative statistics, based on cannabis legalization. And as the industry evolves in some of those more mature markets, that data makes its way over to, new countries looking to, kind of open up their borders or open up their eyes or open up their arms, to the industry. But it's also, it's totally different governments country to country. So things operate a lot differently. Some countries move very quickly. Some can move very quickly. Some move very slowly. Some are very cautious. Some don't want import export. Some do. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of things. And to circle back to Mexico, similar down there, the people voted. They wanted medical cannabis. They wanted medical hemp, CBD, and the government said, okay, let's do it. But for a year, they went without creating any sort of regulations, without creating any sort of program, and different than the United States and different than other federal governments. Basically in Mexico, like, if the government doesn't do it, then the citizens can essentially create regulation based off of an established program, put those forth and start operating in that program. Okay. And so what we supported the group in Mexico with was developing those regulations, essentially developing a program that they could take to the government. And that was eventually adopted by the government and is what they operate on today. In Mexico is the program that we helped create. But in the same, the government has still slowed it down. They've still put certain stipulations in it that don't allow for import export. They've put stipulations in buying genetics, starting farms, and things like that. So even with the people pushing for it, even with the people creating it for the government, even with the government accepting it, the government still kind of stands in the way. And, you know, in Mexico, there's other reasons for why those things might happen. And in other countries, you know, around the world, we kind of see the same thing. Sometimes there's a reason that, you know, maybe we can't publicly speak about. Sometimes it is a reason that we can publicly speak about. Sometimes it's the leader of the government pushing for these regulations. Sometimes leader of the government who's kind of kiboshing any potential for these types of industries. So, you know, it's just different. It's different everywhere you go.
Yeah, I must agree. Each place will have the ups and downs and the reasons why, and it all boils down to education, and that's why I always promote or preach in terms of persons sharing information, assisting others, and that's one of the reasons why a platform such as this was born, is so that persons could have that access to that education, access to persons who have been through the trenches and willing to assist others in their own regions, in their own countries, to actually get things up and running. As we sort of closing down, just one of the things I want to get into is some of the future plans for higher yields. Like, where do you all see yourselves in the next 3 years as a business?
Next 3 years. I always love that question. You know, one of the things that, I mean, the vision that we have is continue to elevate, support, educate, innovate, right? The industry and our clients as a whole, to really open up pathways for conversation, pathways for legalization, proper regulations and proper, you know, development of a business, and be mindful and always be able to mitigate risk, protect return on, you know, we protect investment, and, you know, continue to proliferate and grow, the industry as a whole. You know, to say, you know, global domination or anything like that is, you know, I think a little kind of cliche and kind of funny. But yet at the same time, you know, every month, every quarter, every year that's going by, higher yields is becoming more solidified and more resolved in our mission to advance, you know, the industry, and to help people take a real, not realistic, help take a certain approach to success in, you know, their own vision, their own, you know, project, if you will, of getting and seeing themselves successful. You know, the more success that we have, the more success our clients have, the more success, you know, states and countries and, you know, territories get to, you know, play in this global industry, and have it be a true benefit, you know, to, you know, to the global economy. I mean, you can start getting into certain things like industrial hemp, right? We're talking about replacing lithium batteries with hemp. I mean, and it's, you know, not only is it bring health to your environment by growing it, but by disposing of it, it doesn't ruin the environment. Where lithium, of course, does, getting it out of the ground, and then when it goes back into the ground, it's both destructive to, you know, our ecosystems, our natural environments. And when you have such a plant, again, that has that medicinal, ecological, environmental, organic, you know, restores soil, can replace plastic, you know, I mean, keep going on and on and on. It's amazing. So that message needs to get out and go out, and it's up to us, the entrepreneurs, you know, those that are bringing the groundswell, you know, up, and the, you know, the newer generation of, you know, eyes wide open and global communities, and, you know, the potential is endless.
You know, I think in the last few years, we're starting to become one of the global leaders in cannabis, but in the next 3 years, my idea of higher yields will be to really kind of redefine what it is to be a global leader in the cannabis industry. And I think we're, you know, starting to kind of mold that for ourselves now, but as the world continues to open their eyes and ears and hearts to cannabis, is going to continue to create more opportunities and more benefits to everyone on the planet.
And I support that vision.
Yeah, I 110% support that vision as well. And one of the things that you'll always bring it back to, which I love, is the people. Right? As I said before, we sometimes isolate the plant from the people, when it's really the people that will make the plant impactful as it is. And as Anthony said, it's a super plant. It does so many different things, both for the environment, for people themselves, for the economy. As we close, right, we got a whole heap of information, sound wisdom for persons who probably already start up their own cannabis business or looking to get into it one day. You will have put some things into perspective for a lot of people to reconsider, educate themselves, innovate solid ideas. And I actually just remembered what you would have made mention of, Corey, which is where you need the people, essentially, right? People invest into people and not their business idea, which is exactly what I wanted to remember. And that's very true. People want to see the type of people who they're assisting. It's just not, I will give you this amount of money, or I will just support your business because your business sounds great. It's more so about what this person is looking to do next 5 years, next 10 years with the type of assistance that I provide to them now. And people love to have sound people around them, persons who have experience as well as people who are confident in what they are doing. So as we close, we like to do a little personal trivia on the Caribbean Cannabis channel to allow our listeners to connect a little bit more with our guests. So I'll start off by asking the question to you, Corey. What is one book or a quote that you have used throughout your career? A non-cannabis related question though.
One book. There's a book called The Business Model Generation book. There's a whole series. I think there's like 5 or 6 books kind of in the series, but it really just breaks down how to build a business model, how to create supply chains, value chains, kind of the areas to think through. But it's also a really good book that kind of reflects on other businesses, other industries that there have been kind of disruptions in. People have operated in the same models for years and years until Uber came along, until Apple came along, until Tesla came along. So it kind of breaks down different case studies on those businesses and the things that they changed about the way that we all operate today, or we buy things online, or how we purchase cars, or how we think about the purchases we make. And it's a really, it has a really good printout of, how they create those models, and helps people identify the gaps early, and kind of think through and try to visualize where can you be disruptive in a new market. And with cannabis being such a new market, and us kind of writing new chapters every day to it, I think it's a really great book for people to read and try to digest.
Yeah, so every time I ask that question, I always get a great read, and I like to add to my library actually. One of the next questions that I love to add, and I would have gotten some awesome songs from it. So let's say that you are preparing yourself for important meeting, right? You were looking to close a deal. What is one song that you would put on to assist in motivating you for that meeting?
Oh, this is definitely an Anthony question.
Playlist? Oh, good question. I have so many. So many on my playlist. What do you choose? I like going into, I really do. I like going into a melodic environment. It brings creativity. It brings thoughtfulness. I don't need hype, right? What I'm looking at is the openness, open heart, open mind, and really paying attention and listening to. So groups like Akio, groups like Sown, those, and even Enigma, from kind of an old school band group that, brings that melodic, brings that reflective, innovative, creative environment. So because I want to, that's it. Open heart, open mind, and going into, my day, or going into, talking with clients and customers, it is that innovative, open, creative, open heart, open mind, allow me to hear what you're saying. Allow me to ask the key questions that are going to reveal, passion, reveal vision, from that standpoint, and connect with, every client in that particular way.
Okay, awesome. I'll definitely have to listen to some of these groups. I'm familiar with Enigma, but not Akio and Stone. Next question to both of you. You have your friends, it's a Friday night, work has finished, and you have the option of either a games night or going out for dinner or for a movie with the friends. And what do you all choose?
I said it kind of depends on the week I've had. I'm pretty in the middle. I think, I like to just take it easy, go maybe have a drink or happy hour, or grab dinner and check out a movie. But also, I'm always down to go have a little fun and cut loose a little bit.
Yeah, from my perspective, there's a couple of like key places in and around the Denver area, the local area, that have gotten to the place where they know me. It's just kind of like a great vibe, great music, great people. There's already connected. They kind of know me, and just being in a place where you're known is really great. And to have a nice glass of wine, or to hit a dinner club, dinner jazz club, has always been good. I mean, and again, it goes back to that melodic, that rhythmic, that aspect of, reflection, for me. So that's, after a day, after a week, that's usually, really big for me.
I could definitely lime with you. And if you're wondering what lime is, that's how we usually say, to chill or to hang out here in Trinidad. So yeah, I could definitely lime with you, man.
Yeah. They were just looking for the invite down, so you do the next podcast in person.
That's it. Video cast.
I definitely have that on my list. I have that on my agenda. So it's when you all are ready rather than when I'm ready.
Right.
So before we do leave, anything that you would like to leave with the listeners, where they could find you, how they could keep up to date with Higher Yields Consultancy, or reach out for any of your services?
Yeah, most people reach us through our website at www.higheryieldsconsulting.com. You can also call our 1-800 number. It's 844-HIGH-YIELD, HIYIELD. Yeah, then you can always reach out to Anthony or myself. But on our website, we put up a new blog every week. We generally have 2 new podcasts a month. So there's always a lot of really good information and education on there for people.
Okay, awesome. Fellas, I just want to greatly thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come here and meditate and educate with us here on the Caribbean Cannabis channel. As I said, there was a lot of advice, a lot of wisdom, experience given in the words that you would have offered. And I know that for sure myself would not take anything that you would have said for granted, as well as any of the listeners who have those ambitions of entering the cannabis industry, or even solidifying themselves in the place that they are currently. Right, and I'm definitely looking forward to actually having that in-person interview with you all pretty soon, and advancing the cannabis legalization as well as education movement across the region.
Excellent, Nathaniel. Such a pleasure. Thank you for the invite, and really appreciated the opportunity.
Thanks, Nathaniel.
Hi, give thanks for listening to another episode of the Caribbean Cannabis channel. Be sure to like, share, and follow to stay up to date with all the development and behind the scenes happening across the Caribbean cannabis community. Until next time, remember to meditate and educate.